The night sky over the Pacific looked endless, a dark ocean stretching above another dark ocean. Clouds drifted like torn fabric across the moonlight, and through them crawled an old bomber that sounded more tired than powerful. Its engines didn't roar like the sleek new aircraft back at base. They groaned, rattled, and hummed like something that had already survived too many battles. Pilots used to laugh when they saw it. They called it a museum piece, a relic, a flying coffin. Tonight, none of those voices were here. Inside the cockpit, there was only dim instrument light reflecting in the pilot's eyes and the steady vibration running implying through the controls into his hands. His grip was calm, almost gentle, like a man steering a horse he trusted more than any machine. Static crackled through the radio. Then a voice, sharp, urgent. Enemy fighters approaching fast. Silence swallowed the cockpit again. He didn't panic. He didn't curse. He didn't even blink. He already knew. This bomber wasn't fast enough to run. Everyone knew that. The enemy knew that. The only thing they didn't know was him. He pushed the throttle forward. The engines protested with a deep mechanical shudder, but they obeyed. The aircraft trembled as speed crept upward. Outside the glass canopy, 3 distant lights appeared in the darkness. Then a fourth. Enemy fighters. They were coming in fast, their formation tight, confident, predators closing in on what they thought was easy prey. If he kept flying straight, they'd tear him apart before he even saw their faces. He inhaled slowly. Then he shoved the control stick down. The bomber dropped. Not a gentle descent, a sudden plunge. Instruments shook. Loose metal rattled. Clouds rushed upward like a white wall racing to swallow him. Behind him, the fighters overshot slightly, surprised. No one expected a slow bomber to dive like that. He vanished into the clouds. White fog erased the world. Visibility dropped to nothing. But inside that blindness, he moved with purpose, banking left, then pulling up hard, angling through the mist with calculated precision. 5 seconds later, the bomber burst out of the cloud layer again. The fighters were below him now. His gunner twisted around, disbelief in his voice. They overshot us. The pilot's lips curved faintly. Good. He lined up. The nose gun rotated. Trigger. Red tracer fire streaked through the darkness like burning wires. One fighter flew straight into the stream before its pilot even realized what was happening. The enemy plane erupted in flame, spiraling down in a blazing arc toward the black ocean. Radio chatter exploded in frantic static from the enemy frequency. The hunters had just become targets. The remaining 3 fighters scattered instantly, splitting wide, circling back like wolves that suddenly realized the deer had teeth. Gunfire flashed past the bomber's wings, sparks jumping off metal skin as rounds grazed it. "They're on us," the gunner shouted. "Hold steady," the pilot said calmly. Then he did something no fighter pilot expected. He slowed down. The bomber's speed dropped sharply. One pursuing fighter misjudged the change and shot forward, sliding directly into the bomber's sights. Too close. Too late. The trigger clicked again. Bullets tore through the fighter's fuselage. Fire burst from its engine. The aircraft. Now the last 2 fighters didn't rush. They circled cautiously, keeping distance, firing from range. They weren't laughing anymore. They weren't confident anymore. They were careful. Inside the cockpit, sweat rolled down the pilot's temple, but his eyes stayed steady, calculating angles, speed, timing. For him, the sky wasn't chaos. It was geometry. One fighter dove from above. He rolled the bomber sharply. The attack burst mist. In the same motion, he leveled out, lifted the gun angle, and fired. The third fighter ignited midair, flames pouring from its wings as it tumbled out of control. 3 enemy fighters. Gone. Now only one remained. The sky grew quiet again, eerily quiet. Just engine vibration. Just breathing. Just distance. Far off, the last enemy pilot circled, watching, deciding. The bomber pilot whispered, almost inviting him. "Your move." The fighter turned and charged. The fighter came in fast. Not reckless fast. Not panicked fast. This pilot knew what he was doing. Instead of diving straight in like the others, he stayed low, skimming just above the cloud layer, circling wide like a shark that had learned from watching the rest of the pack die. Inside the bomber, the gunner tracked him through the rear sight. "He's smarter than the others." The pilot nodded once. He could see it too. The last one wasn't chasing revenge. He was studying, measuring distance, waiting for a mistake. That made him dangerous. The bomber's engines droned steadily, but there was strain in the sound now. Metal fatigue. Overworked pistons. The aircraft had already been pushed harder tonight than its designers had ever intended. One wrong maneuver, one violent pull, and something critical might snap. The fighter suddenly accelerated. Not toward them. Past them. It streaked by at a distance, fast enough that the gunner barely had time to track it. No shots fired. No attack. Just speed. The pilot's eyes narrowed. "He's baiting us," he murmured. Sure enough, seconds later the fighter climbed sharply, looping high above their altitude. Moonlight caught its wings as it rolled over and began a steep diving arc, a classic energy attack. If it timed it right, it could fire in a split-second pass and be gone before the bomber could even rotate its guns. The gunner swung his turret upward, waiting. "Not yet," the pilot said quietly. The fighter screamed downward. Wind howled across the bomber's hull. The enemy aircraft grew larger in the glass, fast, precise, deadly. Still the pilot didn't move. Not yet. Tracer fire burst from the diving fighter, slicing through the air. Bullets ripped past the bomber's wingtip. One round punched through the fuselage with a metallic crack. The gunner flinched. The fighter pulled up to climb again. Now, the bomber rolled violently. The sudden movement threw off the fighter pilot's aim just as he passed overhead. In that exact instant, the gunner fired. A stream of rounds chased the climbing fighter. For a heartbeat, it looked like they'd missed. Then sparks flashed along the enemy plane's wing route. Smoke trailed behind it, but it didn't explode. Instead, the fighter kept climbing, wounded, but still flying. "Hit him," the gunner yelled. "I see it," the pilot replied calmly. The damaged fighter leveled off at a distance. Smoke poured from its side, but its control surfaces still moved. Whoever was flying it had skill and nerve. Most pilots would have broken off by now. Not this one. The enemy plane turned again. Slowly, deliberately. "He's coming back," the gunner said. The pilot adjusted his grip on the controls. His voice stayed level. "Yeah, he wants one clean shot." The fighter began its final approach. No tricks this time. No feints. Just a straight, fast intercept, the kind of pass that ended fights. Inside the cockpit, the bomber's instrument panel flickered faintly. One gauge needle trembled in the red zone. The engines were overheating. Another few minutes of hard maneuvering, and they might fail completely. The pilot knew it, which meant this had to end now. The fighter closed the distance. Closer. The gunner fired first. Tracers streaked out, but the enemy pilot juked sideways with sharp, precise movements. The rounds missed by inches. The fighter fired back. A burst slammed into the bomber's wing. Metal shredded. A panel tore loose and spun away into the night. Warning lights blinked. The gunner shouted, "We can't take another pass like that." The pilot didn't answer. He was watching the fighter's rhythm. Every movement, every correction, every angle. The enemy pilot lined up again, preparing for the finishing run. That's when the bomber did something impossible. Instead of turning away, it flew straight toward him. The distance between them collapsed at terrifying speed. The gunner's eyes widened. "Sir?" But then he understood. At this closing speed, neither plane had room to maneuver. It became a test of nerve. Whoever broke first would lose position. The fighter kept coming. So did the bomber. The space between them shrank to seconds. 1 second. Half a second. At the last possible instant, the bomber jerked sideways. The fighter pilot reacted, but just barely too late. He slipped directly across the bomber's nose. Trigger confirmed. The forward guns roared. Rounds slammed into the fighter's cockpit and engine in a single devastating line. For a fraction of a second, the enemy plane held together. Then it burst apart in a silent blossom of fire. Flaming fragments scattered across the sky. Silence returned. No more enemy engines. No more tracer fire. Just the old bomber, still flying. The gunner slowly lowered his weapon. 3 fighters. The pilot exhaled quietly. Yeah. Below them, far beyond the clouds, a faint shape sat on the ocean horizon. Long, flat, unmistakable. A carrier. Enemy carrier. The gunner saw it too. His voice dropped. "We're not done, are we?" The pilot's eyes locked on the distant silhouette. "No," he said softly. "Now we finish the mission." And he pushed the bomber toward the fleet. The carrier sat like a dark island in the moonlit sea, its long deck faintly silver under the clouds. From this distance, it looked almost peaceful, a quiet shape floating alone in the vast Pacific. But both men in the bomber knew better. That silent silhouette was packed with anti-aircraft guns, watch crews, and radar operators scanning the sky for exactly something like them. The gunner leaned closer to the glass, squinting. "They don't see us yet." The pilot didn't respond. His attention was fixed on the approach angle. Distance, altitude, wind drift. Every variable ran through his mind like numbers across a chalkboard. The fighters had been the warning bell. The carrier would be the real test. The bomber droned forward, old engines vibrating like tired muscles forced to sprint one last mile. Below, tiny pinpricks of light suddenly flickered on across the carrier's deck. The gunner's stomach tightened. "They see us." A second later, the sky exploded. Searchlights snapped on from the escort ships below, white beams stabbing upward like spears. They swept across the clouds, crossing, separating, hunting. One beam slid past the bomber's wingtip. Another passed beneath the fuselage. Then a third locked onto them. The cockpit filled with harsh white light. "There we are," the gunner whispered. Anti-aircraft guns opened fire instantly. Black bursts of flak blossomed around them. Dark flowers of smoke and fire punching holes into the night. The first explosions were wide, ranging shots. The next ones were closer. The pilot didn't flinch. He dipped the bomber slightly, adjusting course by a few degrees. Another flak burst detonated just above them, the shockwave thudding against the fuselage like a giant hammer. Metal rattled. A loose panel somewhere behind them clanged violently. "You're lining up a bombing run," he said quietly. "Yep." "With one engine failing." "Yep." "With their whole fleet shooting at us." The pilot's mouth twitched slightly. "Yep." Another explosion rocked the bomber, this one closer than the rest. The aircraft jolted sideways, alarms buzzing briefly before fading. The carrier deck now filled the entire forward view. The pilot leveled the wings. For a moment, everything felt strangely still. No sudden maneuvers. No evasive rolls. Just a straight approach directly into the storm of fire. The gunner understood instantly. "You're committing." Already did. Below, sailors on the carrier were pointing upward. Some were running. Some were frozen in place. Anti-aircraft guns hammered non-stop, tracers clawing at the sky. Altitude dropped. 800 feet. 600. 500. Flak detonated so close the cockpit flashed white. 400. Wind screamed over the fuselage. 300. The carrier's deck guns filled the windshield. 200. The pilot's hand rested on the bomb release. 100. The gunner whispered, barely audible. "Now would be good." The pilot's eyes hardened. "Now." His thumb pressed down. And beneath the bomber, the payload dropped free. The bombs fell away into the darkness, vanishing for a split second before gravity seized them and pulled them straight toward the carrier's deck. For that brief instant after release, everything felt weightless inside the bomber, as if even time itself had paused to watch what would happen next. Then the sky erupted. Anti-aircraft fire intensified instantly, as if the ship below had realized the exact moment the attack became real. Tracer rounds slashed upward in blinding streams. Shells burst so close that the shock waves slapped the bomber like invisible hands. The gunner gritted his teeth, tracking the deck below through the sight. Come on, come on. The bombs were almost invisible now, small dark shapes dropping through layers of light and shadow. The carrier deck rushed up to meet them. The pilot didn't look down. He was already pulling the bomber up, engines straining, trying to climb out before the blast radius caught them. The aircraft shuddered violently in protest. One engine coughed again, a harsh, choking sound. "Hold together," he muttered to the machine, like a man talking to an old horse nearing the end of a long ride. Just a few more seconds. Below them, impact. The first explosion punched into the carrier's forward deck with a flash like a miniature sunrise. Fire burst outward, metal plating tearing open as if the ship itself had been ripped by claws. A split second later, the second bomb struck farther back. He had the entire sky beneath him. Straight down. Nothing between his boots and the ground except air. Enemy fighter pilots feared that turret. It could rotate fast and fire in any direction. From below, it was a spinning hornet's nest of twin .50 caliber machine guns. Many German pilots learned the hard way that attacking from beneath a bomber formation could be deadly. But knowing that didn't make the job safer. Because the same position that made him deadly also made him vulnerable. If landing gear failed, if hydraulics jammed, if the aircraft had to belly land, the gunner would be crushed first. That knowledge stayed with them every mission. Some crews developed rituals. They tapped the turret before takeoff. Some said small prayers. Others joked loudly, pretending fear didn't exist. Humor was easier than admitting the truth, that one mechanical failure could turn the turret into a glass coffin. When fighters attacked, the belly gunner often saw them before anyone else. Tiny specks rising from below. Fast, silent, deadly. He would call out their position, voice steady even if his pulse wasn't. The entire crew depended on his eyes. Then the battle began. The turret spun. Guns thundered. Tracer fires streaked downward like flaming rain. Fighters flashed past, so close he could see pilot helmets and insignia. Sometimes he saw bullets coming toward him before he heard them. Tiny sparks against glass. Sharp cracks. The sound of rounds hitting inches from his face. He couldn't duck. There was nowhere to duck to. His only defense was to fire back. Veterans later said the strangest feeling wasn't fear, it was exposure. Floating beneath the aircraft, separated from everyone else, he felt like he wasn't inside the bomber at all. He felt like he was hanging outside it, alone in the sky, holding on while the world tried to tear him away. When bombers were hit, belly gunners experienced impacts differently. Explosions above sounded muffled. Shrapnel rattled across the fuselage overhead like hail on a roof. The turret shook violently as the aircraft shuddered. And if smoke or flames trailed behind, he saw them first. He always saw danger first. Sometimes that meant watching another bomber below the formation take a direct hit. He'd see it burst apart silently, pieces drifting downward before sound reached him seconds later. Parachutes might bloom, or they might not. He couldn't stare long, because more fighters could appear at any moment. Missions lasted hours. Hours of cold. Hours of tension. Hours of scanning empty sky. Muscles cramped. Fingers numbed. Lips cracked from dry oxygen. But he couldn't rest. The moment he relaxed could be the moment an enemy pilot slipped into position and fired. Time behaved strangely inside the turret. Minutes felt like hours when nothing happened. Seconds felt like explosions when combat began. Adrenaline erased exhaustion. Training replaced panic. Instinct guided his hands across the controls. Many belly gunners were barely in their 20s. Some were teenagers. Yet they carried responsibility heavier than armor plating. One missed fighter could mean an engine destroyed. 1 second of distraction could mean an entire crew lost. They understood that. They accepted it. And they climbed into the turret anyway. Because someone had to. After missions, when bombers returned to base, ground crews often stared at the underside of the aircraft. Bullet holes peppered the metal. Scratches marked where shells had grazed. Sometimes the turret glass was spiderwebbed with cracks that somehow hadn't shattered. Inside would be the gunner, stiff, pale, exhausted, unfolding himself slowly like someone waking from a nightmare he couldn't fully remember. Some kissed the ground. Some laughed uncontrollably. Some said nothing at all. Historians later studied combat records and realized separated from the rest of the crew by distance, noise, and steel, he sat alone at the very rear of the aircraft, staring through reinforced glass into a sky that could turn hostile without warning. Unlike earlier bombers, the B-29 used remote turrets for most defenses, but the tail gunner remained physically present, the last line of protection against enemy pursuit. Enemy pilots from the Imperial Japanese Army Air Service knew that if they approached from behind, they could target engines, control surfaces, and fuel systems. Destroy those, and the bomber wouldn't make it home. So they came from the rear, which meant the tail gunner saw danger first. Always. Hours could pass with nothing but empty sky behind him. Engine vibration hummed through the metal frame. Frost crept along window edges. His oxygen mask hissed quietly with each breath. Fatigue pressed against his eyelids. But he couldn't relax, because attacks never announced themselves. 1 second the sky would be empty. The next second it would be filled with fighters. When that happened, everything accelerated. The gunner's pulse spiked. Hands tightened on the controls. Training took over. He tracked incoming aircraft, calculated speed, adjusted lead, and fired bursts of .50 caliber rounds into the distance. Tracer fire streaked like glowing threads. Sometimes the fighters broke off instantly. Sometimes they kept coming, guns flashing, determined to press the attack. In those moments, the tail gunner wasn't just defending himself.